Got big diamond rings and shiny limousines.
I'm gonna miss you too, Sonny.
Do you remember those familiar senior stars? The ones who meant something and then just vanished without a word? These were the faces we grew up with, whose voices filled living rooms and car radios like part of the family. Why did they leave without goodbye? And how did we never notice until they were gone? There was a time when Gene Hackman was everywhere. He was the face of authority, the embodiment of intensity. A man who could play a troubled cop, a hardened coach, or a criminal mastermind and make each one feel completely real. In the 1970s and 1980s, he was one of the most dependable actors in Hollywood. He won 2 Oscars. He headlined films that defined eras. And then, quietly, he was gone. No farewell tour, no big public statement, just silence. The last time most of us saw him on screen was in Welcome to Mooseport in 2004. Not exactly the kind of swan song you would expect from a man whose filmography includes The French Connection, Unforgiven, and The Conversation. But Hackman made his decision, and he stuck to it. He moved to New Mexico, started writing novels, and never looked back. He did not need applause to measure his worth. He had already said everything he needed to, through decades of unforgettable roles. And instead of clinging to what was, he quietly chose what came next. For years, rumors swirled. Was he sick? Was he forced out? But the truth is simpler, and maybe sadder. He just had enough. Hollywood moves fast, and it rarely slows down to ask who still wants to play. Hackman, at some point, stopped wanting to. And because he was always more private than polished, he never explained himself. For fans, it left a strange ache. We never got to say goodbye. No final scene. No interview reflecting on a half-century of iconic work. He just disappeared from public life like a closing curtain you did not see coming. You find yourself watching an old movie and wondering, where did he go? Not because you missed the news, but because the silence was the answer. And maybe that is the hardest part. When someone leaves without warning, it feels like something was stolen, not from them, but from you. Gene Hackman never owed us more roles. But after giving so much, his absence feels louder than any performance. He did not vanish, he just stepped away, and the spotlight somehow still waits for him. Shelley Duvall was never meant to be typical. Her voice, her eyes, her presence, they were all a little offbeat, a little otherworldly, and that was what made her unforgettable. She was not Hollywood's idea of a leading lady, but in the 1970s and early 1980s, directors could not get enough of her. Robert Altman cast her again and again. Stanley Kubrick made her immortal, though not in the way she hoped. And then, slowly, Shelley disappeared. Her final roles came and went with little fanfare. One minute she was on screens, her voice unmistakable, her energy still strange and magnetic. The next, she was gone. No talk show circuit, no red carpet farewell, just an absence. The whispers started almost immediately. Mental health, trauma, isolation. Stories surfaced about what she endured during The Shining. Kubrick's obsession with realism pushed her to emotional collapse, and the industry barely blinked. She did not burn out. She was worn down. And once the cameras stopped calling, she stopped answering. She was not lost. She was left behind. The same industry that celebrated her uniqueness was never built to protect it. And when the spotlight dimmed, no one stuck around to light another. For years, fans wondered where she went. She had given so much, not just performances, but a kind of vulnerability you do not see often in actors. She made her characters feel like real people caught in surreal moments. Whether it was Popeye, Three Women, or The Shining, she was the emotional anchor, even when the world around her was coming undone. And maybe that is the part that hurts most. The industry that once celebrated her never really protected her. Shelley eventually resurfaced in a 2016 interview, older, fragile, and still carrying the weight of a world that never knew what to do with someone like her. It sparked a new wave of compassion and guilt. For a generation of viewers, it was a painful reminder that brilliance and well-being do not always walk hand in hand. Shelley Duvall never got the goodbye she deserved. She just slipped out the side door, and we are still looking for the light she carried with her. Rick Moranis made people laugh without trying too hard. He was the guy next door, the nerd who got the girl, the scientist who shrunk the kids, and somehow he made it all believable. Whether he was Louis Tully in Ghostbusters or Wayne Selinsky in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, he always felt like someone you already knew, kind, awkward, endlessly likable. And then, just like that, he was gone. No scandal, no burnout, just gone. In the early 1990s, his wife passed away from cancer. And Rick, without hesitation, chose to step away from the spotlight to raise their children. No press tour, no sympathy play. He just walked away from fame because something else mattered more. He turned down scripts. He turned down sequels. He said no to millions of dollars and yes to school lunches and carpools. Hollywood kept calling, but he stopped picking up, and people respected him more for it. Because that kind of silence is not weakness, it is strength. Most people wait too long to leave the stage. Rick knew when the role was over. He chose real life over lights and never looked back. That kind of clarity is rare, and it is why we still miss him. For years, fans asked where he went. Rumors swirled about a comeback, but Moranis never rushed back into the light. He did voice work here and there, a cameo or two. But the man who made us laugh through some of the biggest comedies of the 1980s never seemed in a hurry to return. And maybe that was the point. He left when it still mattered, when people still wanted more, when his characters were still echoing in living rooms. His goodbye was not loud, it was almost invisible, but it was one of the most powerful choices in recent Hollywood memory. Rick Moranis never truly disappeared. He just chose something more important. And in doing so, he gave us a final lesson. Sometimes stepping away is the bravest role you will ever play. At one point, Erin Moran was America's little sister. As Joni Cunningham on Happy Days, she lit up every scene, wide-eyed, sharp-tongued, and somehow holding her own in a cast full of larger-than-life characters. She was the heart of the show's youth, the one growing up in real time as the world changed around her. Then came Joni Loves Chachi, a spin-off that never really found its footing, and just like that, the momentum started to slip. After Happy Days, the offers slowed. She took small roles, tried to hang on, but the glare of early fame never softened. Hollywood had already moved on, and it did not leave breadcrumbs behind. Erin's story is one we know too well but still never know how to fix. She was young, famous, adored, and then forgotten. The industry did what it always does, used her up, then let her go. She battled financial struggles, lived out of motels, and when people did talk about her, it was in whispers or tabloid punchlines. For a long time, she disappeared from the public eye entirely. No interviews, no nostalgia tours, just a girl who once seemed destined for lifelong stardom, quietly fading away. When she passed away in 2017, the tributes were kind, but they also felt too late. The silence around Erin Moran was not just about absence, it was about how fast the door shuts once you are no longer the star. She gave her childhood to the screen, and when she needed the industry most, it offered nothing back. She never had the big comeback moment. She never got the applause she earned. Instead, she left without a curtain call, and a part of our television childhood went with her. Michael Schufling is one of those names you may not remember right away. But say Jake Ryan, and you are right back in the 1980s. The dreamy, quiet guy from 16 Candles, leaning against a red car at the end of the movie, changed teen cinema with just one look. He was not flashy, not loud, just present, solid, romantic without trying. For a brief moment, Schofling seemed like he could have had it all. He showed up in a few more roles: Vision Quest, Mermaids, Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. And then, nothing. No press, no announcement, no drama. He walked away from the industry in his early 30s and never came back. No scandal, no public meltdown, just a choice. He left Los Angeles and moved to Pennsylvania, where he opened a woodworking shop. In a world obsessed with staying visible, he chose to disappear. And in doing so, he became even more of a mystery. Fans wondered, what happened to Jake Ryan? Why would someone with that much presence, that much potential, give it all up? The truth is, no one really knows. Schofling never explained. He never needed to. He did his work, and then he left, like a character written out of the script with a clean exit. There is something poetic about that kind of silence. Hollywood can grind people down. Schofling avoided that. He gave us a role that still echoes, and then he disappeared. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In a way, that might be the happiest ending of all. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Bobby Sherman was everywhere. He was on album covers, magazine pages, television screens, and teenage bedroom walls across the country. A pop star with a clean-cut image and a voice built for radio, Sherman rose to fame on Shindig, and Here Come the Brides, and carved out a spot in pop culture with his boyish charm and soft-spoken confidence. He was not edgy, he was not wild, he was safe, and that made him huge. For a while, Bobby Sherman could not walk down the street without being mobbed by fans. He had hit singles, sold out shows, endless television appearances. And then, at the height of it all, he walked away. He left the spotlight not in disgrace, but in pursuit of something more grounded. In the mid-1970s, Sherman trained to become an emergency medical technician. He later became a deputy sheriff and taught first aid to police officers. While the world waited for a comeback album, he was saving lives. And he never once made a spectacle out of it. His music faded from the charts. His posters disappeared from the stores. But he was not hiding. He was just working a different kind of front line. No tell-all interviews. No tours reliving the glory days. Bobby Sherman simply chose a different life. Fans always wondered if he would return. For years, his name would pop up on reunion wish lists and retro countdowns. But Sherman never chased nostalgia. He had done the fame thing. And then he left with a kind of grace most stars never get to know. He disappeared without drama, without scandal, without a single tabloid trail. And maybe that is what makes his story so unforgettable. He gave everything to the world once, then quietly chose to give in a whole new way. There was a moment in the late 1970s and early 1980s when Jan Michael Vincent looked like the future of Hollywood. Blonde, confident, and impossibly photogenic, he had the kind of screen presence that did not need words to sell a role. You just believed him. Whether it was as the Golden Surfer in Big Wednesday or the hotshot pilot in Airwolf, Vincent always carried a kind of stillness, the kind of cool that people do not fake because they cannot. He was poised for superstardom. And for a while, it seemed inevitable. But instead of rising, Vincent vanished. Not all at once, not overnight, but piece by piece. He struggled with fame in ways that were easy to miss, until they became impossible to ignore. Alcohol, fights, arrests. The tabloids took notice before the industry did. And when they did, the roles started shrinking. By the time Airwolf made him a household name, the storm had already started inside him. He was paid more than any actor on television at the time, and yet, off-screen, he was losing everything. Relationships fell apart, injuries mounted. His face, once his calling card, began to show the wear. And Hollywood, with its short memory, looked the other way. There were comebacks, or at least attempts, but never long enough for anyone to really believe in them. By the early 1990s, Vincent's name had all but disappeared from casting lists. He made the occasional appearance, but they were quiet, low budget, and quickly forgotten. His health worsened. His voice changed. His leg was amputated after a severe infection. And even then, the world barely noticed. He gave a rare interview near the end, looking nothing like the man who once graced every magazine cover. His speech was slow. His gaze was tired. And yet, in that silence, there was something brutally honest. A man who knew what had slipped away and no longer had the energy to chase it. Jan Michael Vincent never got a last great role. He never had the redemption arc. He just left. The spotlight moved on, and he did too, only in a different direction. a quieter one, a lonelier one. There was no Hollywood send-off, no standing ovation, just a final passing headline, and the memory of someone who once had it all and somehow vanished before we realized he was even gone. When Miami Vice hit the airwaves in 1984, everything changed. The music, the fashion, the mood, and at the center of it, alongside Don Johnson's pastel suits and quiet stares, was Philip Michael Thomas, electric, expressive, and every bit his equal. As Detective Ricardo Tubbs, he brought heart and rhythm to a show that was all about vibe. The chemistry was real, the camera loved him, and for a brief window, the world did too. But then, the noise faded. After Miami Vice, Philip Michael Thomas made a few guest appearances and some television movies. But the roles never matched the presence he had in that moment. It felt like Hollywood did not know what to do with him once the neon lights dimmed. He was not just an actor, he was a dreamer. At the height of his fame, he famously coined the acronym EGOT, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, and claimed he would win them all. People laughed. Some admired the ambition, but when the awards never came, the joke lingered longer than the dream. He dabbled in music, even released a few albums, but they never broke through. The industry had moved on, and Philip stubbornly himself never chased after it. For a time, he found new work, voicing a character in Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, a nod to his Miami Vice roots. It was a moment of recognition, but not a return. Interviews became rare, appearances even rarer. He settled into a life outside the spotlight, far from the streets of television crime and pop culture obsession. The man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Don Johnson, who helped define an era, just stepped away. And the world barely blinked. There is something haunting about that kind of disappearance, not tragic, not scandalous, just quiet. Philip Michael Thomas never burned out. He faded by choice, or maybe by circumstance. Either way, the applause stopped before the performance ever really ended. He had the look, the voice, the energy, but somehow the roles never came. And now, when people remember Miami Vice, they say Don Johnson's name first, even though Tubbs was just as vital. Maybe Philip never needed the EGOT. Maybe he just needed someone to believe the dream was possible. Or maybe, like the show he helped carry, he belonged to a very specific time. And once that time passed, he took the silence as his cue to go. Anita Baker never chased the spotlight. It came to her. That voice. Low, velvet smooth, wrapped in warmth and ache. From the first few bars of Sweet Love, you knew exactly who she was. She sang like someone who had lived every lyric, but never needed to scream to prove it. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, her sound was everywhere. It was elegant, grown, confident, a mix of soul and jazz and something harder to define. And then, just as quietly as she arrived, she stepped back. There were no scandals, no meltdowns. Just a gentle pull away from the center of the stage. Anita had always been private, even at the height of her fame. She toured when she wanted, recorded when she was ready, and never rushed to stay relevant. She did not need to. Her voice alone had gravity. But after a while, the albums stopped coming. The appearances grew fewer. The silence stretched longer. By the mid-2000s, fans were still listening, still hoping, still waiting. Rumors swirled about a comeback, a new album, a farewell tour. But nothing came. Anita had chosen a different pace. She raised her children, focused on her life, and let the world spin without her. Occasionally, she would reappear for a one-night performance, a brief interview, a moment that reminded everyone just how much they missed her. But then she would vanish again, like a song you hear once and spend years trying to find again. In 2018, she returned for a farewell tour, and the demand was immediate. Sold-out venues, standing ovations, fans crying in the crowd. It was not just about the music, it was about absence, about being reminded of what had been missing. But even then, the tour came and went like a whisper. No album, no Netflix special, just the music, and the memory. Anita Baker never disappeared in scandal. She disappeared in grace. She let the silence speak for her, and somehow it said everything. She may never chase the spotlight again. But the glow she left behind still lingers in every note she ever sang. Barbi Benton was never just one thing: model, actress, singer, host, icon. In the 1970s, she was everywhere. She had the smile, the figure, the camera presence, and, for a time, one of the most recognizable names in American pop culture. Many first knew her as Hugh Hefner's girlfriend, the woman who helped shape the Playboy Mansion into a symbol of excess and fantasy. But Barbi Benton was more than a headline or a centerfold. She carved out a career that touched television, music, and film on her own terms. And then, without warning, she stepped away. You could see her on Hee Haw or The Love Boat, always playing the part with charm and a wink. She released albums, country pop with surprising vocal strength. She guest starred, hosted variety shows. For years, she kept her name moving without letting it settle. And then, one day, it was gone. She made the choice early, and she made it firmly. Family came first. When she became a mother, Hollywood stopped being her world. Not in scandal, not in crisis, just in priority. She did not cling to relevance or long for the stage. She simply walked out of the frame and started living real life. In interviews, she has always seemed content. There is no bitterness, no regret. Just a woman who once graced magazine covers and then traded it all for privacy and peace. She occasionally surfaces for interviews or nostalgic features, but you get the sense that even when the spotlight calls, she never really misses it. And that is what makes her absence so intriguing. In an industry where so many cling to fading fame, Barbi Benton let go, gracefully, intentionally. Her name may not come up in everyday conversation, but if you were watching back then, you remember the voice, the laugh, the presence. She brought brightness to every set she stepped onto, and then she took that light with her. Barbi Benton did not disappear. She just knew when to stop performing. And in doing so, she gave us something rare, a clean, dignified exit in a world that rarely offers one. For a certain generation, Mark Lynn Baker will always be Larry Appleton, nervous, neurotic, and endlessly flustered in Perfect Strangers. Paired with Bronson Pinchot's wild-eyed Balky, the two made one of the most lovable odd couples in sitcom history. You could count on Larry to worry too much, plan too carefully, and completely unravel by the third act. And yet, it never got old. Lynn Baker gave the character depth, a kind of reluctant sweetness behind all the frustration. He was the anchor in a show that often leaned into chaos, and somehow he made it all feel real. The series ran for 8 seasons and was a hit in its time. And when it ended, so did something else. Lynn Baker did not disappear entirely. He did theater, took on guest roles, stayed creative, but he never returned to the kind of prominence that Perfect Strangers had offered him. He did not chase a bigger spotlight. He just moved quietly to the side. It was not a retreat, it was a redirection. Broadway called, and Lynn Baker answered, stepping into roles that challenged and fulfilled him in different ways. He became one of those actors who never stopped working, just stopped being seen. You would catch him in a guest arc here, a voice role there, but he never played the fame game again, and maybe that was the point. Mark Lynn Baker was never about flash. He was about performance, about doing the work, not chasing the headline. In an era of sitcom stardom, he offered something more grounded. And when it was time to step back, he did it without fanfare. He reappeared on occasion, in The Leftovers, in Succession, in New York theater, always sharp, always compelling. But the buzz had moved on, and Lynn Baker led it. No dramatic exits, no tell-all interviews, just a quiet shift from lead roles to the kind of actor you're always happy to see but rarely expect. There is something comforting about that kind of career. It tells you that disappearing is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is just a choice. And Mark Lynn Baker made his, and did it with the same calm, steady heart that made Larry Appleton unforgettable. Beverly D'Angelo had a kind of presence that could not be duplicated. Witty, sultry, surprisingly vulnerable. She could crack a joke and then break your heart in the same breath. To most people, she will forever be Ellen Griswold, the loyal, endlessly patient wife in the National Lampoon's vacation movies. That role alone cemented her in pop culture history. But D'Angelo was more than the straight woman to Chevy Chase's chaos. She was magnetic, she had range, she had it. And then, somewhere along the way, the roles started to fade. Not because she lost the spark, but because Hollywood, as it so often does, could not figure out what to do with a woman who aged. In the 1980s and 1990s, she could play anything: comedic, romantic, dramatic. She worked with Al Pacino, earned an Emmy nomination, played Patsy Cline in Coal Miner's Daughter, and nailed it. But by the 2000s, the momentum had stalled, not from lack of talent, from lack of vision in the industry around her. And so, Beverly D'Angelo started to disappear. Not in a sudden vanishing act, but in a slow fade. The appearances got smaller, the projects more sporadic. She popped up here and there, a guest star, a supporting role, but it felt like Hollywood had stopped knocking. D'Angelo never made a scene about it. She did not launch a rebrand or make noise on talk shows. Instead, she lived, raised her children, focused on her life, and waited, it seems, for people to remember what she could do. Recently, there has been a quiet return. Small roles, indie work, and a handful of sharp interviews that remind us she is still here, still brilliant, still funny, still sharp enough to steal a scene without raising her voice. But even now, she remains on the fringe, half remembered by some, quietly admired by others. Beverly D'Angelo never left because she had nothing left to give. She left because the phone stopped ringing. And instead of chasing it, she found something else. That kind of exit is not a failure. It is resilience. She did not disappear. She just let the silence speak for her. You might not remember her name, but you probably remember the face. Danielle Brisebois joined All in the Family in its final season, playing Stephanie Mills, Archie Bunker's young niece, suddenly part of a show that was already a cultural force. She was only a child, but her presence brought something new. She was sweet, sharp, and layered. A tough little girl navigating a household that was anything but simple. She held her own with Carol O'Connor, no easy feat for anyone, let alone a teenager. Then she followed the show into Archie Bunker's place, and again, she fit right in. But like so many child actors, her time in front of the camera faded fast. She had a few roles after that, a sitcom here, a film there, but by the early 1990s, the face was gone from the screen. For most people, that would be the end of the story. But not for Danielle. Behind the scenes, she was just getting started. She pivoted to music, started writing, and found a voice that had nothing to do with acting. You may not have seen her, but you definitely heard her in songs like Unwritten and Pocketful of Sunshine, both co-written for Natasha Bedingfield. She became a Grammy-nominated songwriter, crafting hits for other artists while never stepping back into the spotlight herself. And somehow, that quiet success made her disappearance from acting even more striking. Because she did not fade, she transformed. She let go of the attention and found a way to keep creating, just from a different angle. And that takes a kind of strength that Hollywood rarely celebrates. Not every star disappears into scandal or heartbreak. Some just choose a quieter lane. Danielle Brisebois did not chase fame into adulthood. She chose fulfillment instead. She found it in melody and lyrics, in building something for others to shine through. And maybe in doing that, she found a kind of freedom the camera never gave her. In the 1970s, Deborah Lee Scott had one of those faces you could not miss. She was everywhere, in sitcoms, game shows, ensemble comedies. She played the girl next door, the sassy friend, the woman who always got a laugh without stealing the scene. You saw her in Welcome Back, Kotter, Mary Hartman, Angie, and even the Police Academy movies. She was not the lead, but she was the glue, the energy that lifted every scene she touched. She had something electric. You felt like you knew her. And then suddenly, she was gone. Not from tragedy, at first, but from opportunity. By the mid-1980s, the roles slowed down. The phone stopped ringing, and like so many supporting actresses of the era, she found herself edged out without explanation. She stepped away from the screen, not because she wanted to, but because the industry moved on. She moved to Florida, did some work behind the scenes. She became a talent manager, still connected to the business, but no longer in the frame. It was not a big exit. It was a slow fade. And for fans who remembered her spark, the silence was confusing. Then came heartbreak. In 2001, Deborah Lee lost her fiancé, a first responder, in the September 11th attacks. It devastated her. Friends said she never recovered. She moved again, stayed quiet. And in 2005, she passed away suddenly at the age of 52. No fanfare, no grand return. Just gone. Deborah Lee Scott never got the career resurgence she deserved. She never had the late-life role that reminded the world how much she could do. But she was part of an era, a voice in a chorus of women who helped shape how sitcoms worked. Her laughter was easy, her timing was perfect, and her legacy is more than a list of roles. It is a reminder that sometimes the people who carry a scene never get to carry the spotlight. But that does not make them any less unforgettable. Janet Jackson was once untouchable. She ruled the charts, the stage, and the culture with the kind of command only a few performers ever reach. Rhythm Nation, Control, Velvet Rope. Each era was more than music. It was movement. She was not just the little sister of a famous family. She was her own force, bold, subversive, vulnerable, a true pop architect. But after 2010, something changed. There were albums. Unbreakable came in 2015. There were tours, short runs, festival appearances. But the power had shifted. The world kept spinning, and Janet, once always a step ahead, started feeling like a quiet echo instead of the voice leading the charge. Some of it was timing, some of it was trauma. The Super Bowl controversy in 2004 cast a long shadow, one that never fully lifted. Her brother's death in 2009 pulled her inward. Motherhood, marriage, divorce, life happened, and Janet for the first time stepped back. Not completely, but enough for the silence to be noticed. And that silence felt strange, because Janet had always been fearless. Even when the media tried to define her, she found a new way to speak. She reinvented herself without apology. But after 2010, the reinvention slowed. She was still present, but less visible, less dominant. Fans waited. Some still do. There have been glimpses, documentaries, collaborations, talks of new music, but the pace has never returned. The spark never fully reignited. And the stage, once hers, now waits more than it watches. Janet Jackson did not disappear in scandal or failure. She disappeared in layers, one moment at a time. A fade, not a fall. And while the silence is understandable, it is also mourned. Because when you have seen someone shape a generation, watching them retreat into the background feels like a quiet kind of heartbreak. She is not forgotten. She is not gone. But she is missing from the space she once owned. And maybe one day, she will return in full. But if she does not, her silence will still speak louder than most ever did. Which of these silent exits stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Leave a like if any name brought back a memory, and subscribe so you never miss the stories of those who walked away without a spotlight.